Ah, what a lovely Port Armando night where absolutely nothing terrible has happened. I think I'll go for a pint at the Battered Cod. I hear there's talk of an expedition searching for some old pirate treasure. What silly thing will the boffins think up next? Wait. Is that? Hey everyone, I just played Rise of the Golden Idols 4 DLC packs, and they were okay. Could have been worse. I started off 2025 by taking a look at the base game, and it just didn't do it for me. But I was hoping that its DLC packs, The Sins of New Wells, the Lemurian Phoenix, the Age of Restraint, and the Curse of the Last Reaper, might reignite my passion for the series and its setting. One of them actually did, and if you've watched the previous 3 videos I've made about this franchise, which one it is shouldn't come as much of a shock. What surprised me more was just how much it reignited my interest in the series. It had me staying up late to get through one extra case, and jumping out of bed the next morning to continue right where I left off before the necessities of life could get in the way of the story it was trying to tell. It's made me want to gush about this series again, with the same enthusiasm I had when reviewing the case of the Golden Idol. So let's talk about it. But before I get my hands into the guts of these DLC packs, this is inherently post-game content. It expects familiarity with the twists and turns of both Rise of the Golden Idol and Case of the Golden Idol, plus that title's own 2 DLC packs. And so this is your only spoiler warning. Let's get to it. When I made my original video about Rise of the Golden Idol, I criticised the game for introducing so many side characters, seemingly for the purpose of bringing them back in the DLC packs. I was wrong about Mumati De Silva coming back, but Roy Sampson definitely makes a return in The Sins of New Wells, the first of the 4 DLC packs. The 4 cases are set a little while after the ending of the base game, with Roy and his new partner Cliff tasked with busting a mysterious inner-city drug ring. Mechanically, it's no different from the base campaign, though its attempts to bump up the difficulty are pretty hit or miss. The opening screen of Unraveling, where you have to interpret this bad trip from context clues, is great. It hits you with both a striking image and a striking mystery, despite the lack of words to collect from around the environment. But the DLC pack also features my least favourite puzzle in the entire series. This wall of empty boxes that offer no context clues on how they're meant to be arranged. Untangling what happened before Roy and Cliff arrived from the discombobulated ravings of Officer Martins is a lot of fun, but actually laying them out in the Events tab sucks. You can have the correct answer, but because you've laid them out vertically instead of horizontally, the game won't accept it. I vaguely recall there being one puzzle with this issue in the base game too, and it was just as frustrating back then as it is here. The language of some puzzles come off as a bit mangled as well, like they've been put through their own round with the disarranger. For example, this events box in the opening case. Quote, somehow the water tower fell, killing one gangster. In the same way, the door was opened. End quote. Another writing foible that pops up quite a bit is how often names are repeated, like Roy Sampson went to see Hildegard Bauer because Hildegard Bauer had a lead on a robbery Roy Sampson was investigating, that sort of thing. And let he who is without literary sin cast the first stone on that one, but either way, it doesn't flow. The sloppy wording is a bit of an issue throughout the DLCs actually, but at least this sort of frustrating wall of blank spaces disappears after the Sins of New Wells. The other packs do a much better job of ramping up the difficulty by adding complexity rather than stripping away context. The presentation has improved at least. I much prefer Paul Alexander's score for Sins to his work on the base game. His sound just suits a buddy cop 1970s neo-noir more than a sci-fi 1970s conspiracy. The environments have a little more grit and grime to them than any case in the base game too. That cleanliness made sense for the well-funded research centres and corporate offices, but even the housing tenement came off as a little sterile. The Sins of New Wells smears that urban decay across the walls with graffiti and smog and pockets of darkness that give the setting a little more texture than it had before. You get a wider look at what life in New Wells is like too, from this well-kept park in the middle of town to a dog racing track, to this random fast food joint in a seedy neighbourhood, and Vlad, Finn, and Dick might be the best Golden Idol has ever looked. I'm kidding, it's obviously these escaped racing dogs. Look at their little vests. Each scenario is filled with a lot of fun detail too, stuff the game doesn't actually draw attention to either, like how a tiger print car is mentioned in the first case, and then appears in the corner of the second. I love this guy walking through the park, and the little hints of something out of the ordinary were great too. Now this is the idol experience I've been missing. I wonder, who could possibly be behind that? Probably the biggest twist of the Sins of New Wells is that Roy is balding under that hat, followed closely by the fact he's a little gnome of a man. Why is he so small? Or is Cliff just a giant? Oh yeah, and Echo Secunda's back. Him escaping the New Wells mental asylum in the body of Auriel Toussaint was the biggest plot point Rise of the Golden Idol left hanging, and is what Sins is most interested in tying up. It might frame itself as a buddy cop story with Roy and Cliff as the stars, but after the first case, Cliff doesn't actually factor into the plot much at all. Instead, it's more like a game of cat and mouse being played between multiple cats and multiple mice on both sides of the law that Roy and Echo Secunda just happen to fall into. Hildegard Bauer is supporting Mayor Moira Meredith's heritage project to bully the rival crime families out of New Wells, but the Andiers aren't about to roll over and capitulate. They plant a tape in her office to record evidence of her criminal activities, and leak it to the mayor, who realises the only thing to do to make sure the Bowers see justice is fall on her own sword. Hildegard can't be having that, and it just so happens the lads picked up some weirdo in a red coat with some incredibly powerful tech capable of scrambling memories. Echo Secunda's dealings with Bauer are a matter of convenience, and as long as Bauer's supporting his research, he's happy to scramble the memories of a few of her enemies. What he even wants is never really elaborated upon. Hildegard's plan to scramble Moira Meredith's memories in the middle of her press conference is entirely Hildegard's, and she would have gotten away with it too, if it weren't for that meddling Roy. The day is saved, but that's not really what I was interested in. Hildegard's plan is just an inversion of Jack's, scrambling one person's memories for her own selfish reasons, rather than obliterating millions for seemingly selfless ones. What kept me playing was the Disarranger. It's the latest incarnation of the Golden Idol, salvaged by Echo Secunda from parts of the idol after the climactic moments of the final clash, and it's a little more like what I was expecting from Rise overall. It's not a one-to-one recreation of the idol from Case, but it's got the gold and the gemstones and the weird powers that can unravel steel as easily as flesh. The events of the base game have left it diminished in much the same way as Echo Secunda himself. It can only rearrange or disarrange things now. It can no longer take or give, and neither last very long. Roy saves Moira at the expense of getting zonked out of his mind, and in his final confrontation with Echo Secunda right after, ends up turning the Disarranger back on its creator. The blast wrests Echo Secunda away from the controls, allowing some pieces of Auriel Toussaint to re-emerge, and in that moment of calm, Roy takes it upon himself to destroy the thing once and for all. The Golden Idol has survived worse in the past, so it's not a definitive end for the thing, but for now at least, no part of it remains operational. Really? That's it? When Rise let the matter of Echo Seconda go unresolved by the end of the final case, it left the door wide open creatively, an ancient Lemurian loose in the present day, with all the awful knowledge of that earlier age at their fingertips. You can do so much with that. We knew he was a sentinel from the base game, but not his motivations. Why he would be so determined to escape the asylum, what he would do once he did. He could have been anything. Hero, villain, there was no way to tell from the clues given in the base game. I didn't put together that he was going to steal some pieces of Lemurian tech out of the idol the second he got the chance, though perhaps I should have given the signs were always there, but I at least thought the DLCs would follow his journey to whatever fate he deserved. I didn't expect him to slide on a banana peel into a criminal conspiracy and then end up getting his brain scrambled before he could even make his goals clear, because that's the thing. He didn't know the bag of food he stole from the drive-thru had a little extra spicy something in there with the burgers and the wraps. He was just after something to eat. His meeting with Hildegard Bauer was born of coincidence, and his demise at the end of the DLC pack cut short whatever potential he had as a temporal fish out of water. It even undoes one of the harder gut punches of the base game. When Jack Nowak gave Auriel Toussaint the full idle brain blast and overwrote him with Echo Seconda, I figured he was full on dead. I didn't realise his original self was just locked out of the driver's seat. It was the one big twist of Rise that I felt was on par with the highest highs of Case, and the DLC just walks it back like the devs are going, don't worry, the stakes were never really that high. In fairness, Auriel isn't completely free of Echo Seconda. They take turns driving the body now, but it's not the identity death sentence it once was, and it makes the original twist shine a little dimmer as a result. Like with the apparent destruction of the Golden Idol, it's possible Echo Seconda could still regain full control of Auriel's body and get right back on his bullshit, but as of writing, both their character arcs have been hit with one hell of an anticlimax, if only because it comes so soon and so suddenly after his rise into the central figure around which the story revolves. Roy doesn't get any such chance at recovery though. With the destruction of the Disarranger, his mind is to remain scrambled forever, but as we see in the epilogue, it's not like it's changed him all that much. He's still a detective, and a damn good one as long as Cliff's on hand to translate his word salad, so he's doing pretty well for himself. It's just a real wet fart of an ending, though Hildegard Bauer meeting Tessa Navari in jail was a fun cameo. And speaking of Tessa Navari, it's very funny to me just how much the Lemurian Phoenix leans on a young Tessa Navari in terms of marketing, because she's barely more than a cameo here than she was in The Sins of New Wells. The Lemurian Phoenix casts its gaze back in time and across the world, from the allied states of Hesperia in the 1970s to the Kingdom of Lemuria in the 1940s and 50s. It's the only one of the DLC packs to run 5 cases instead of 4, and if The Sins of New Wells felt like a rehash of Rise in terms of plot, then the Lemurian Phoenix feels like a relitigation of the base game's anachronic structure. The first case is actually the last case chronologically, and it uses expectations built across the following 3 scenarios to frame Koi Nagasai for the King of Lemuria's murder. Koi had a blink and you'll miss it cameo in the base game as Tessa Navari's mentor, though she takes more after his twin brother Ori in terms of her faithfulness. Koi sees the office of High Sentinel as nothing more than a means to enrich his own life with gifts, gold, and girls, despite what the tenets of the position may prescribe. Indeed, in the Age of Restraint, we get to see exactly what those tenets are, and Koi breaks each and every one of them, though like a lot of real-world cult leaders, he's able to bend them just enough to stay in power without going over the line. He's not amassing wealth and assets, he's accepting gifts, he's not taking advantage of young women, he's giving his closest lost disciple's spiritual guidance, and as long as Koi stays in the good graces of the king, then he's likely to get away with whatever he wants. He makes for a compelling foil to the other villains featured across the franchise. Lazarus Hurst, Lavu Mata, Jack Nowak, and even Echo Seconda all have aspirations of building a better world, and they're all too blinded by their own biases to see that those aspirations are flawed at best and evil at worst. But Koi Nagasai only wants power for power's sake, which is honestly kind of refreshing after so many great idiots with extreme ideas. That doesn't make Koi any less dangerous though. He was born into power, and he's not willing to give up an inch of it. When his father Pravi proclaimed he would live forever as First Sentinel, Koi killed him to take up the mantle with his brother. When one of his oldest followers discovered he was faking the miracle of levitation, Koi killed him to keep it a secret. He's murdered a lot of people to get what he wants, so it's not a stretch to assume that he's also responsible for the murder of King Lutri Manzek in the opening scenario. After all, it's the era of decolonization. Lemuria attempted to westernize in the past, but it didn't work out, and King Lutri's looking to take the place back to its cultural and spiritual roots. So all those nice clothes and fancy cars Koi loves so much, they've got to go, right? Nope. It's all one big bait and switch. Koi had nothing to do with the murder. In fact, he and King Lutri are on better terms than either are with Ori. King Lutri will allow Koi's indulgences as long as the First Sentinel does as the Tikor Palace says, which is why when the DLC pack climaxes in a trial by ordeal between the two brothers, the crown has an obvious favourite. It's meant to be a magic trick. The brothers are shackled together inside a burning building, and whoever emerges unscathed is declared the spiritual victor. Yet not only has the crown provided Koi an extra key, but he's got his own panic room underneath his temple to ride the fire out. It's not hard to see why Ori doesn't have the king's ear the way Koi does. After his father's death, he retreated into his faith, ever fearful of catching the same disease that seemingly killed Pravi. He still seeks guidance in the sacred waterfall that supposedly spared his father's life during Pravi's own trial, which is what earned him the position of First Sentinel to begin with. So Ori did it right. After he learns the truth of his father's murder and Koi's part in it, he survives the ordeal and kills King Lutri in revenge for indulging his brother. No, he dies in the ordeal too. Well then, who did kill King Lutri? Don't tell me it's Tessa Navari. We already know her future. Tessa, or Lizzie as she's revealed to be here, isn't above murder to get what she wants. The one way in which she and Koi do not differ, but she's a Westerner in a foreign place. She's not interested in the local politics, and Koi even notes that once she thinks she has what she wants, she'll be on the first plane back to Albion, naive though she clearly is. We already know what she wants too, the golden idol of legend, though all she manages to get away with is a fake made in Lanka. No, she's not the murderer either. At the end of this long and twisted road, King Lutri's killer is revealed to be Jamati Pira. Fucking who? We technically first see him in royal blood as part of the parade celebrating King Lutri's public address at the end of his journey. His first chronological appearance is in the third scenario as an acolyte of Koi's, willing to do whatever is asked of him. At first, he seems like an overly ambitious understudy, not too different from Koi himself, but Pyrrha's true motivation is revenge. His parents were executed on charges of blasphemy after pointing out that the miracle of Pravi's survival at the waterfall was an obvious fake. Koi, Ori, and King Lutri all presided over the trial, and made sure to crack down hard on their dissent. Pyrrha joined Koi's temple to get close to him, to find an opening and avenge his parents, and he gets it after Gresto's murder. Koi orders him buried in the sacred temple where Pravi was supposedly saved by the waterfall, since no one will ever dare search for a body on such hallowed ground, and while getting rid of the evidence, Pyrrha discovers a cave behind the falls. Hidden by the water, he's able to reveal the truth of Pravi's murder to Ori, who then challenges Koi to the trial by ordeal, which the crown rigs in his favour, but Jamati Pyrrha then sabotages in the other direction by locking himself in the bunker and letting both sentinels burn to death. As he emerged from the fire alone, the Lemurian Phoenix of prophecy, he is then made First Sentinel, which gives him access to King Lutri and his very unguarded neck. neck. With his parents avenged, Jamati Pira flies into exile, the victor in a game no one but he knew was being played. It's often said that revenge is a dish best served cold, or that the best revenge is to live well, but Jamati Pira subscribed to the third old adage about vengeance. When you set out for revenge, dig 2 graves. Jamati Pira, in fact, dug 3, but none were his own. It's a satisfying conclusion to a poorly told story. As a prologue to Rise of the Golden Idol, it works well enough, but in and of itself, I think more needed to be done to set up Jamati Pira as an active player in the plot. Part of that comes down to the Lemurian Phoenix's nature as a DLC pack. The devs gave it an extra scenario to flesh things out, one it definitely needed because the story is just too big for 4 cases. But even so, it feels like too much crammed into too little. It really needed 6 or 7 cases to properly flesh things out, to let Jamati Pira's slow rise to protagonist come off as natural. The DLC tries to thread him in organically with this flyer for his family's circus acts, and this front page article about his parents' execution, but I missed most of those clues on my initial run. Jamati Pira just came out of nowhere until I went back and played the Lemurian Phoenix again. I think it's a missed opportunity that we don't get to see the trial and executions of Pira's parents as a proper case, especially since it's so integral to the story being told. Beyond that story though, I don't have much to say, other than Kyle Misko's back, baby! There are some great tracks here to go with some fun scenery. I especially love the parade. It's cool to see the city of Mu, even if briefly, and I like the detail of Koi's bunker being built in the third scenario before seeing it complete in the final one. I love all the little callbacks through architecture and costuming to the Spider of Lancre too. Also, there are a couple of demon children. So there's that. In terms of puzzle design, there are still a couple mangled event boxes, but I do think the devs got the difficulty curve right this time around. The bit where you have to translate the waterfall proclamations in the fourth scenario might be the second hardest thing in the whole game. It was a lot of fun to figure out. Overall, I enjoyed the Lemurian Phoenix more than the Sins of New Wells, and even when I was playing it, I couldn't help but notice the further away from Rise of the Golden Idol we got, the more fun I started to have, but there it is. Mind you, the next DLC pack proved that rule isn't as rock solid as you might think. The Age of Restraint is the only one of the 4 DLC packs that I wish didn't exist. I think the time and resources would have been better spent fleshing out the other 3. There's nothing wrong with it mechanically. None of the cases reach the challenge of translating the Waterfall's proclamation in the Lemurian Phoenix, or that puzzle in the Curse of the Last Reaper, but they were engaging. I enjoyed the programming puzzle in the final scenario, interpreting the Spale Dance was fun, figuring out what the hell was happening in the first and preferred cases kept me going for a little while. If nothing else, it was a nice break from the extreme difficulty of the DLC packs on either side of it. But the Age of Restraint is by far the biggest conceptual fumble in the series yet, because it takes place entirely in ancient Lemuria. I can only think of a single time when getting a good look at the mysterious precursors in a piece of science fiction or fantasy has worked, and that is the Horizon franchise, because the mysterious precursors in those games are, in essence, us. Us a few decades in the future, admittedly, but close enough that any player going through those games today can fill in the blanks on what that world looks like. The mystery isn't who they were, but why they disappeared, and how that affects the present tense of Horizon's plot 1,000 years later. It neatly sidesteps the issue of ruining the backstory's mystique the more you learn about it, because there is no mystique to ruin, but that's very much the exception rather than the rule. Alien is a lot more compelling when you don't know anything about where the xenomorphs or the derelict came from, and it's no surprise Disney has bent over backwards trying to erase the definitive answers provided by Ridley Scott in Prometheus and Alien Covenant. Halo is a lot more interesting when all you know about the Forerunners is their dangerous tech. The trilogy of books written by Greg Bear to set their war with the Flood in stone doesn't actually add anything to the backstory, other than answers to questions no one asked. I'm not saying creators or writers or custodians of any given setting shouldn't know the finer details of their backstories. They absolutely should, to some degree, but it's not something the audience ever needs to see in all its gruesome detail, because it's always disappointing. Yet for some reason, the longer a franchise with an ancient advanced civilization central to its backstory goes on, the more likely it is that all mystery about that lost civilization will be ripped away. And now with the Age of Restraint, it's apparently the Golden Idol's turn. What frustrates me most of all is that the Age of Restraint embraces several issues that I praised the Lemurian Vampire back in Case of the Golden Idol for deftly avoiding. Vampire was set in Xenopolis, the ancient Lemurian city where the Golden Idol was originally recovered by Albert Cloudsley and Oberon Geller, but its inhabitants were not Lemurians. They were a group of people who arrived on Monkey Paw Island long after the collapse of that earlier civilization, who knew as little about the city's technological relics as the newly arrived Europeans. They seemed inspired more by indigenous Australians or Pacific Islanders than the South Asian-coded Lemurians. The Age of Restraint chooses to show Xenopolis in its heyday, and even gives a definitive location for Lemuria. The map you see in the Lemurian Phoenix suggests it could be India, but the Age of Restraint reveals it to be this world's equivalent of Australia. Which, you know, flattering, but also has the unintended consequence of erasing Indigenous Australians and their history and their culture. And I'm sure some of you may be typing out, who cares, it's just a video game, it's not even set on our version of Earth, as I say these words, to which I retort, why then are England, France and the United States still recognisably England, France and the United States? Why are only modern Western powers given the privilege of a direct parallel? Why are Lemuria and Lanka so vaguely defined by comparison? Why do Aboriginal Australians have to be pushed aside to make room for a cool new civilization OC do not steal? Australia has a bad enough habit of doing that in real life, thank you very much. Now, I'm not accusing the developers of anything here, I'm certain this was all unintentional, and in fairness, other parts of the world map are, to put it kindly, a little inaccurate, and to put it unkindly, fucked. I was hoping when I went back to record the DLC that the map might be inaccurate the way ancient maps were, that maybe Lemuria was actually a completely fictional continent located somewhere in the Indian Ocean as I first assumed when I played Case. But that doesn't fit the fiction. Lemuria at the time of the Age of Restraint is highly advanced. They'd have the technology to map the world accurately, unless it's set so far in the past that modern day coastlines haven't yet emerged. Whatever the case, it's impossible to ignore the fact that Lemuria is replacing pre-colonial Australia, rather than engaging with it. Whether or not it crosses the line into being problematic is not really for me to say, but I couldn't just ignore it either. And the decision to set it in ancient Lemuria wasn't even really worth it in the long run. There are some gnarly deaths, like how Lurum Lurvel got Brundleflied together with part of a tree by his own son using unsanctioned tech. The man is not breathing. Yeah, no shit. The Reservoir Dogs style heist was a neat idea, and it was lovely to see the original Golden Idol again, if but for a moment, but the only thing the Age of Restraint really brought to the table was Echo Seconda's backstory. In both the base game and The Sins of New Wells, he was a complete unknown, as mysterious as the time and place he originated from, but the Age of Restraint reveals him to be an old fat balding racist who wants to harness forbidden technology to conquer the world and bring civilization to the barbarian masses beyond the kingdom's borders. His name isn't even Echo Seconda, it's Heko Sift. The DLC pack completely demolishes his character, and reduces him to just the first in a long line of Golden Idol villains who think they know what's best for the world. The way his plan is thwarted before it's even really begun is just the icing on the cake. He's shit on the boot heel of history, and learning that makes his unceremonious defeat in The Sins of New Wells sting a little less than it originally did. But that's about all I enjoyed of the Age of Restraint story. Learning that the human beings of ancient Lemuria were just that, human beings, does have its parallels in real-world history and archaeology. For every stern portrait or photograph or statue, there are thousands of wall carvings of dicks or declarations that so-and-so was here. Humans have always been goofballs, and so it only makes sense that the people of ancient Lemuria were too, but that doesn't make the reveal any less deflating. The internal politics of the Sentinels and the farm are no different than any scenarios set in the present day, and for how advanced Lemuria was, a lot of its technology comes off as overly convoluted. For every automatic harvester, there's a bunch of weird gizmos like the quaffizer, which turns text into water so that the ideas contained within it can be consumed. Why would someone even think to make that? The fact it's a core element of Heko Sift's plan just makes it come off as even more contrived. There were hints of that in other games. The idol itself seems like it would be annoying to wield at the best of times, and building a whole-ass robot to use it for you just feels unnecessary. Fun as it is to see a similar automaton here in the Age of Restraint. The flying saucer is fun, but a lot of the robots within it come off more as quirky than convenient. The face guarding the door to the Source's vault is good for a laugh, but the idea of the Sentinels having to talk to it every single time they want to go inside just sounds awful. And maybe that's the point, a way to show ancient Lemuria has grown high on its own supply. Another major aspect of Heko Sift's plan involves a tampered Veridola, a headset which normally determines whether the speaker is telling the truth or a lie, represented in gameplay by changing the colour of a person's dialogue, which I do like. Heko Sift gives one of the Veridolas the old Orwell 2 + 2 is 5 chat, so that it determines truth as lies and lies as truth, without so much as a second glance from the other Sentinels. And just as well, because Etham Lurvel is able to use it to shut down the giant killer robot after it starts putting everyone in the naughty bucket. Did I mention the Age of Restraint has a giant killer robot? No? Neither does the Age of Restraint until it's suddenly there, barging through the city of Xenopolis. One of the other Sentinels, Tala, programs it to find Heko Sift after his grand heist, but because she did so in breach of one of the core Sentinel tenets, it no longer counts her instructions as valid, and since by that point Heko Sift is technically dead, just data stored on a disk, the robot can't find him, meaning absolutely everybody's going in the naughty bucket until it runs out of people to inspect. It's only because the heist freed Etham from his cell, and one of the thieves died with the tampered Veridola on his head, that the boy is able to redeem himself for killing his father by shutting the robot down. On paper, the climax works really well. It plays into the themes of the ancient Lemurians losing control of their own technology that's been simmering all through Rise of the Golden Idol, and it's a satisfying way to tie things up, but the problem is the robot still comes out of nowhere, or at least least it feels that way. Like with Jamati Pira in the Lemurian Phoenix, it might be mentioned offhandedly at some point before its introduction, but I feel it really needed to be seen in gameplay for its rampage at the end to really shine. And that's kind of all I have to say about the Age of Restraint. It's a real nothing burger of a DLC that was probably best left on the cutting room floor. All the little continuity nods were fun, and Oriel gets a proper send-off in the DLC's final moments, but overall, yeah, I was not impressed with this one. I wanted to talk about the ebb and flow of the DLCs in the order that I played them because I think it's an integral part of why the Curse of the Last Reaper was able to grab my attention from moment go. Putting aside the fact there's nary a mention of Rise to be found, going through the Sins of New Wells and the Lemurian Phoenix, both good but not great DLC packs, and then the Age of Restraint, a total misfire in every respect, only to arrive at this little slice of Lovecraftian horror, was just the thing to drag me back in. It is also everything I was hoping Rise overall would be, and I could not be happier. The time mechanics are front and center to a greater degree than they've ever been. The difficulty hasn't hit the ceiling but crashed right through it. Broadside Betrayal is the only scenario in the entire game I completed without solving every piece of the puzzle first. There's a stronger connection to the events of Case, with a more consistent audio-visual style that ties the pixel art backgrounds of the first game to the painted vistas of the second. It certainly helps that Kyle Misko is back as composer, with his best work in the series to date. It leans into the occult gothic horror aspects of the setting in a way no part of Rise really has before, and then juxtaposes that distinctly 18th and 19th century subgenre with its 20th century successor, cosmic horror. The story has a much tighter focus, with a core group of characters rather than a cast of thousands. My only criticism is that it's confined to 4 cases, but even then, it doesn't feel smothered by its length like the Lemurian Phoenix did. I'd have loved more, but it's complete as is. So imagine my surprise looking through the reviews only to discover some people really don't like The Curse of the Last Reaper, but I guess if you prefer Rise to Case, that makes sense. There's very little of the second game here beyond the new mechanical loop, and the upgraded art style, though even that appears to be changing in small and subtle ways. There are aspects of Curse that I'm pretty sure are rendered in 3D, like the water in Port Armando, and some of the sprites. It's not the first time 3D has been used in the series, but I'm pretty sure it's the first time 3D has been used in this way. It makes me wonder if the DLC is a testing ground for ideas that may or may not appear in future games, though maybe simulating the surf just saved time compared to animating it by hand. I don't know. I have no insight into the minds of the developers, but either way, it was very well done. I didn't even notice it until I played through the DLC a second time to record it for this video. It wasn't the only subtle thing about the DLC either. So many little aspects of Case creep in at the margins over the first half of the expansion pack before the mask comes off in the third scenario to reveal it's been a direct continuation all along. Speaking of masks, the Brotherhood at the centre of Case has survived Lazarus Hearst's hostile takeover in the 1790s into the 20th century, and they're right back on their bullshit searching for ancient Lemurian artifacts. Instead of the Golden Idol, they're after something called the Wishbloom, a Lemurian relic stolen by pirates back in 1797 that has been lost ever since. Though if people remember the heist by 1927, it's mostly for the rest of the Lemurian gold the Last Reaper grabbed along with it. The legend of Captain Triton's buried treasure is buzzing around Port Armando, with multiple explorers, sailors, and criminals claiming to have a genuine map to its resting place, and at least one of them is willing to kill to keep the secret for themselves. Eliza Swan, Jasper Wiles, Myrtle Song, Captain Alita, and Ansel Marsh are all after the treasure, and the puzzle of figuring out which of them has the correct map is a lot of fun, though they may wish they weren't in the race if they could see what transpired in the Red Herring Inn back in 1797. The case opens on the final moments of Eleazar Garner, as he lies bleeding out on the hardwood after an attack from something. For the first time in the series, we're not dealing with a human threat. We're dealing with a monster. And oh boy, do I love a good creature feature. It's a fun way to frame the DLC overall, too. You never actually see the attack on the Lemurian ship. Instead, you retrace the Last Reaper's journey from Treasure Island while following the Brotherhood's expedition in search of it, until both halves of the story converge where X marks the spot. Not that anyone but Antoine Spilsbury and Myrtle Song know that it's a Brotherhood expedition. As far as Eliza, Jasper, Ivan, and Captain Alita are aware, it's just a straightforward search for lost pirate gold. The second scenario reveals the Last Reaper never even made it back to Port Armando. After Captain Triton's death, the crew tore itself apart in the ensuing succession crisis, with only Bosun Garner and his son escaping by raft. This is the puzzle that left me brain dead. Both times I played through the DLC, I ended up solving the whole scenario before cracking this particular case. Matching the pirates to their skeletons, figuring out who was allied with who in the mutiny, and what weapons did each of them in, was a brutal test of situational awareness that defied many of the criticisms I made about Rise's new mechanical loop. This cannot be brute forced. It demands your full attention across both time periods, and it's great. A real love letter to Return of the Obra Dinn, and just as challenging. I especially loved coming across a couple of old friends. Looking through the ship's manifest, I spied Walter Keane and Ada Baker were part of the crew before they perished on Treasure Island. Walter Keane I remembered from Case, last seen luring one of Lazarus Hearst's lackeys into a trap in an attempt to get his stolen youth back. But Ada Baker, I was a little foggier on. It took a couple of minutes rummaging around in the Mind Palace, but then it hit me. She was the woman who assisted Walter in trying to poison Edmund Cloudsley after he stole the Golden Idol from the Brotherhood of Masks. They weren't on the ship at the Brotherhood's behest this time around though. They were in it for themselves, as revealed at the conclusion of the scenario. Ergin too, also a returning character from Case, gave Walter Keane information on a Lemurian ship transporting a relic capable of restoring the years stolen from him by Lazarus Hearst after the Revolution began eating its own, which he then took to Captain Triton Triton, and the rest is history. Of course, you don't just pull off the biggest heist in history without ruffling a few feathers. The Seven Seas Company and Lemuria are both out for blood, so in order to avoid both, the crew of the Last Reaper had no choice but to hide the treasure somewhere safe until everything blew over. Nicholas Maker, who I'm almost certain is another minor character from Case, proclaimed they be hunted for 40 years. But what's a few decades when they've got a treasure supposedly capable of granting its owners the wish of extra life? Sure, it didn't exactly work out that way, but the idea was sound, and to be fair, something's still prowling around the wreck of the Last Reaper by 1927, as Captain Alita learns firsthand when he ventures down into the hold. Things don't improve once the expedition arrives on Treasure Island either. Alita's corpse has been strung up as a warning, and while everyone else is still willing to press on, Antoine's getting cold feet. Because he's dead. Someone poisoned him to keep the expedition from turning back, and 130 years earlier, Captain Triton and a few members of his crew suffered the same fate at the hands of Ada Baker. Only the Garner boy escaped being poisoned, and we already know he returns to the Last Reaper to escape with his father, No-Nose McGee, but Ada's fate is left up in the air. The two journeys collide in the fourth and final scenario, Wishbloom. In 1927, the Brotherhood's expedition is intercepted by Ansel Marsh in his balloon, who has been in cahoots with Ivan all along, though both are dead by the time the player shows up. They managed to capture Jasper and the treasure while Eliza and Myrtle were down in the grotto, but it was a short-lived victory. Ivan shot Ansel to make more room for the treasure on the blimp, but then immediately sent it plunging into the depths because he thought filling the balloon with air would make it go up, not down. Oops. And side note, but figuring out the weights in this puzzle broke my brain. I know the conversion from kilograms to quantum fluxes Ansel wrote out had to be wrong, but I could not for the life of me figure out how, which I suspect was the point. His equations are so far off that if Ivan hadn't betrayed him, they'd still be in the drink, because both them and the treasure far surpass the blimp's weight limit. Back in 1797, things don't go much better for Walter Keane. He tried to snatch the Wishbloom for himself after stashing the rest of the treasure down in the grotto, but Captain Triton sniffed him out before he could get away with it. He's happy to leave Keane at the bottom of the grotto to die, though Ada Baker might have a few thoughts on that before too long. I do like the way the grotto changes across 130 years. It's so choked with stinkweed by 1927 that the crocodiles have been forced out, and good luck finding the Wishbloom even with its sweet smell. Searching out the relic is actually what Eliza and Myrtle are up to during all the excitement up on the bluff. Myrtle offered Eliza her share of the treasure if she took off her gas mask and found the Wishbloom for her, and without knowing the consequences, she agreed. Upon learning the truth from Walter Keane, she immediately turns around and shoots Myrtle Song dead. What Myrtle knew, and no one else on either expedition did, is that the Wishbloom grants your wish, but at the cost of transforming you into a human-animal hybrid. The beast that delivered the killing blow to Bosun Garner back in the first case was in fact his own son, transformed into some sort of monster. One that's been dead for many years if this strange skeleton in Port Armando is indeed what became of the lad. Unless, this is the titular curse, and one whiff of the Wishbloom is all it takes to start the change. The crew of the Lemurian treasure ship were all decked out in high-tech gas masks, but Captain Triton and those aboard the Last Reaper took no such precautions. They were all in the process of transforming by the time the crew tore itself apart, something that becomes extremely obvious once you take a look at some of their remains. The extra teeth are a dead giveaway in hindsight, but even how so many of them looked like they'd suffered through botched plastic surgery while they were still alive makes it clear something was off. And not only that, there is no reversing the change. Eliza was doomed the second she removed her gas mask. The final puzzle of the DLC, and Rise as a whole, might be a bit mangled, but the way it says Myrtle was willing to sacrifice Eliza's humanity for the Wishbloom hits the nail right on the head, and the fact it is irreversible gives it the same weight I felt Oriel getting overwritten by Heko Swift had in the base game until the Sins of New Wells revealed it wasn't a permanent change. But it's not all bad. Walter Keane has found peace with his life as a turtle man. He is, in fact, turtly enough for the Turtle Club, and so does Eliza after the change takes hold. In a past life she was an aviatrix, so the Wishbloom gives her wings to keep on flying. Ada Baker also became a cat person at the Wishbloom's influence, but she's long dead by 1927, having passed in the early 1800s. Still, she and Walter got a few good years together on Treasure Island, free of the Brotherhood and the Seven Seas Company, and any more idiots with ideas on how to use the Golden Idol for their own ends. It's as happy an ending as this story could have hoped for, and as bittersweet a send-off as you can get. Rise of the Golden Idol was hit or miss for me overall, but at least it ended on a very high note. Which doesn't exactly explain how No-Nose McGee escaped getting transformed. I mean, you still breathe through your mouth. Just because he's missing a nose doesn't mean the Wishbloom shouldn't affect him. But given how good the rest of the DLC was, it's a bit of a plot hole I'm willing to overlook. Having now caught up with all things Golden Idol, I'm struck with the same thought I had when I first finished Case. I would love more. Curse of the Last Reaper has me ravenous for another adventure, but if there isn't, I'm still satisfied with what we've got. One thing I am certain of is that the tale of the Golden Idol is done. I can't see any way of keeping it at the centre of the series without it coming off as contrived, but the Wishbloom shows there are other weird Lemurian artifacts out there waiting for some ambitious fool with delusions of grandeur to exploit them. This setting is bigger than the Golden Idol, and leaving the thing behind is probably the only way to keep the franchise fresh going forward. Or maybe Color Grey Games will move on to something entirely new. Who knows? To sum up my thoughts on the DLCs though, I'd say the Sins of New Wells, the Lemurian Phoenix, and especially the Curse of the Last Reaper are worth your time. They were all, in their own ways, what I wanted Rise of the Golden Idol to be all along, and it's nice to get closure on a few hanging plot threads and character arcs from both games. But the Age of Restraint was the complete opposite. If that's the direction the series is headed, I think I'm done. But if it isn't, yeah, bring it on. I still think the Rise of the Golden Idol took a bit of a tumble, but it doesn't mean the franchise can't get back up and keep on running. Thanks for watching. And that's the video. Before I go, I'd like to thank by name the people supporting me with $5 US a month or more on Patreon. Anonymous, Abril, Azazel, Cass, Hawkwing2652, Heymatey, Heavy, Jeffiet, Jeff Ladd, Kim, Operator Error, Paranoid Android, Reaper2122, Chiselfish, Sminglis, Sarah Bloomer, Smorsky, Sneezy McGlassface, Space Quest Historian, This Sauerkraut, Thomas Angel, Thomas Elliott, Tree3 Angry Bees, Ursa, and Zeke the Phantom. Thank you so much. This video and everything I make for the channel is now made possible by their generous support. I don't make money off ads and I don't take sponsors. So if you like what I do and want to see more, please consider donating. And if you can't support monthly or don't want to give Patreon money, Ko-Fi is also an option. And if financial support isn't possible and you still want to help the channel out, please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and share the video around because YouTube sure won't. Links are in the description. Anyway, next month we're going to get fucking weird with it. I'll see you then. Thanks again for watching.